All right, guys. I've got a Shimano Corrado. It's a Bantam CU 200, and this reel I've had for I don't know, might be 15 years old. Had it for a long time, and it still works pretty well. However, the last few trips out, I've left it in the garage because it's been making a lot of noise, and I couldn't figure out what it was. So I decided to get brave and take it apart, and it ended up being a lot easier than I thought. So I just wanted to share with you and show you how to take a baitcaster apart. Most of the reels that are baitcast are going to be very similar in the parts that are inside and how to take it apart. Obviously there'll be some variation, but in general it really is pretty easy. So I'm just going to take this apart for you, and some of the tools you'll need. Need a pair of pliers, a ratchet of some sort. This is a 10 millimeter socket based on what's in here, and then this is just a little screwdriver tool. I got this for Christmas. It's got a bunch of bits in the end, and you can see there's a whole handful of different bits. So you want to find the screwdriver that fits your screws the best, so that you don't strip them out, because if you strip them out, you can't use your reel. You have to get a new one. So I'm going to start by taking the handle off. It's just real quick. This little cap pops off, and this, don't lose your screws and stuff when you take it apart, obviously. And then that holds that nut in place so it doesn't back off and you lose your handle in the water. So to get that off, I'm using my 10 millimeter socket. Just gently, whoops, righty tighty, lefty loosey. Just gently break it loose and then thread it off with your fingers. I'm going to put all these parts in a pile over here together. Your handle comes off. Now this is the drag piece, and it's actually spring loaded. It's got a spring that comes with it, so I'm going to keep all those together. And then inside of that is another nut, and that's where I'm going to use my pliers to just gently break that loose. Notice I said gently. You want to do everything you're doing with these, you want to be gentle so you don't tear it up. Obviously with anything you're working on. I spent quite a few hours this weekend working on my truck, replacing the water pump, only to find out that that wasn't the part that was leaking, so now it's at the shop. So hopefully I can get that fixed so I can start fishing again. But anyways, there's some other washers and stuff inside of this nut, and you don't want to lose any of those things. Again, I keep those all kind of in a pile together, so that here's two more that came off the inside all together, so I don't lose them. And then I'm going to take this off, this little cap, which adjusts how this thing casts, and there's a spring inside of that too, so make sure you don't lose that. And then at this point, this particular reel has 4 screws on the outside of this side cover here, but I'm also going to go ahead and pull off the weight system, this side panel, and then the spool will come out. Make sure that if there's any washers or anything, just keep an eye out for stuff, little washers or things that might fall out, so you don't lose those, so you can put it back together so it works correctly the next time you want to go and use it. So I'm going to take my little screwdriver, and again, be careful so you don't strip out your screws. Obviously, the more times you do this, the more risk you run of stripping out a screw. Might not be a bad idea to loosen these up in a crisscross pattern, kind of like you would bolts on your car wheel, your lug nuts, but they're not, I don't know, maybe it's not that important. But again, these screws are small. Be careful when you take them off so you don't lose them. And you might have some screws that are of different lengths. You want to make sure that you put those back where they came from. I have that on mine. One of these screws is longer than the other ones, so I try and make sure I put that back where it came from. And if you forget, and like you put a screw in the wrong hole, you'll know if it's the wrong hole, because if the screw's too long, it won't go all the way in. They should all be threaded the same, so you're not going to damage that, but it just helps to try to remember where things came from. So then you're going to gently pull this off, and one of the things that scared me was, okay, when I pull this off and I've got all my gears and stuff here, what parts are just going to pop off and fly all over the place? And you know, I watched a video earlier And the guy was just explaining, you know, when you take this stuff off, it's not like stuff goes flying everywhere, and it's not that intricate. I mean, you can basically see there's the main gear here, the axle or the shaft that turns the whole thing. There's a couple springs here that I'm going to pull off. There's a pinion gear and a couple plastic pieces. And obviously, yeah, you could take all that stuff apart, but even if you did, it's not so complicated that you couldn't get it back together. So when I opened up this reel, I noticed there was a ton of grease that was all caked and built up in there. So I kind of scraped that out and got rid of that buildup. Just to try and clean it up a little bit. Obviously, I'm going to put some more oil on this just to make sure it's lubricated properly and it's working smoothly. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take these two springs out right here. They're small. So again, keep your parts together that kind of go together. That'll help you put it back together. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this plastic piece here. It's actually my pinion gear. And so that plastic thing that holds the pinion gear in place comes out, and the pinion gear itself comes out. And when I looked at this plastic piece, right inside that little yoke, I guess, where that pinion gear sits, I'll show you. Kind of sits in there like, oops, that's backwards. No, that's right. It kind of sits in there like that. That was full of dirt and crud. It's hard to see. So I cleaned that out as best I could. And when I put it all back together again, I noticed that it reeled a lot more smoothly and there was a whole lot less noise. Now, when I looked at my pinion gear, this end of it, when I say this end was okay. It was this end, the one that's kind of mushroomed there. That's just the shape of it. Those teeth were kind of boogered and worn. So I think that replacing this pinion gear will improve the way that this reel reels, the noise that it makes, and just the overall smoothness of it. So breaking this apart, looking at it, figuring it out was really pretty simple, something that I was afraid to do before. And I think I actually figured out the problem with this particular reel, or what's causing it to make noise, or what was causing it to make noise. Just cleaning up the pinion gear a little bit, cleaning up this plastic piece, getting all the dirt and gunk off of it really helped it reel a little more smoothly with a whole lot less noise. And obviously you could take some kind of like brake cleaner or carb cleaner, whatever you got, to degrease this thing and get it all cleaned up real nice. As a matter of fact, I'm probably going to do that myself before I put this back together for the final time. But I just wanted to share with you guys how simple this was to pull it apart, and I'll put it back together, and you can see I can get this done very quickly. So let's go ahead and get it put back together. And so I'm going to take this, make sure I get the gear in that correctly. I'm going to stick that back where it goes. I'm going to take my two little springs that I pulled off of there and put those back in place. I'm going to, let's see here, what else do I have that came off of there? Nothing, so we're good. I'm going to take this side cover piece. I'm going to double check and just make sure I got everything put back where it goes. I think so. Slide that back on gently. And then the next thing I'm going to do is put these screws in that hold that side cover back in. Again, I'm going to look and make sure that I put the screws in the right place and try to remember where they came from, especially if you have some that are of different lengths. I'm just going to get them threaded most of the way in, and then I'll go back and tighten them down with a crisscross pattern so I don't damage the outer cover. So I'm just putting them in, not even snug yet, just getting them threaded in, and then I'll go back in a crisscross pattern and I will snug them up. And they don't have to be crazy tight. Because obviously you don't want to break a screw, you don't want to damage the internal stuff, you don't want to strip a thread. Just get them in there. Alright, so I'm going to tighten this one, tight, go to this one, tight, go to this one, tight, and then go to this top one, tight. So at this point, what do I have left to put back together? I'm going to go ahead and throw my spool back in. Nice to see that. That's in there. Make sure the lines I'm gonna have to cut some of that off. I just boogered it up. I'm gonna put this side cover back on, pop the little handle out, tighten it up. There's that. I'm gonna get this knob put back on that affects the braking or the drag when you're casting. Make sure your spring's still in there because that's supposed to be there. Tighten that up. Now at this point, I'm gonna put, I got these two little washers that go on the drive shaft. Those are gonna go on there gently. And I'm gonna take this other washer that goes on top of those two. And I'm gonna take my square nut. I'm gonna thread that on gently. Do it, carefully so you make sure you don't cross thread it. And once I get on there, I'll snug that up with my pliers. Actually, if you just hold the spool with your thumb, you can snug that up with your fingers about as tight as it needs to be. It doesn't have to be super tight, just nice and snug so stuff doesn't come off. Then I'm going to take my drag piece, put the spring there, take your star, whatever it looks like, mash that down on the spring. You want to compress that spring and hold it down with your fingers so you can get your nut back on there. Again, you want to do that carefully so that you don't cross thread it. Actually, make sure the flat side of your nut is down against the your drag star, because it's got rounded edges on top. You want the flat side down. Okay. So I'm going to get that snug with my fingers, but then I'm going to take my 10mm socket and just snug that up. Not too tight. It doesn't have to be ridiculously tight. Just enough. Oh, you know what I did wrong? What's missing? So that has to come back off there. One of the most important parts of this reel is this part. You can't reel it in if you don't put that on. So don't forget your handle. Get that on there again, flat side down. The flat side of that nut wants to be flush up against this handle. Get that on there snug with your fingers. Take your 10mm socket, snug that up. Okay. Now, here's the other thing you got to pay attention to is the that nut. You have to get it on there just right, or when you put this plastic piece on there that keeps that nut from backing off, if you don't get it lined up right, the hole or that screw, this little bitty screw that holds that plastic cap on there, won't line up with that hole. So make sure you get that lined up. There you go. Put your screw back in, screw it in, snug, and voila. For a 15-year-old reel, she's still pretty smooth. So there you go, pretty easy, not too difficult. You will be surprised at how easy it is to get in there. And you'll probably, if you're having some issues with noise, squealing, clicking, just rough reeling, get in there, look at it, clean it up, and I think you'll be surprised at how easy it is to figure out and troubleshoot your problems. So hope that helps.